Let me quickly see it, please. Yes, that is set it up right. Um, can you switch the king and the queen for the chessboard? Can you switch the king and the queen? So switch the places of yes, please, on both sides. Yes, switch the white side too. The king and the queen. Yeah, that's right. Okay. And now the chessboard is set up. Now I'm going to be talking about taking turns, taking pieces, and how to win. So there are always turns to chess. So the person with the white pieces always moves first, and then players alternate turns, which means that the players with the white pieces go, and then the player with the black pieces go, and then the player with the white goes, player with the black goes, and it repeats. And then players can only move one piece at a time, except when castling, which I'll explain later. So it's pretty obvious and straightforward. So one person moves, only moves one at a time, and then alternate turns. So now about taking pieces. So players can take pieces when they encounter an opponent in their movement path. Only pawns take differently than they move, which will be explained later. So players cannot take or move through their own pieces. So when your opponent is in your piece's path, then you can take it, which means that if you take it, your opponent piece is out of the game. The main objective of this game and how to win is by doing a checkmate, which I'll cover that later as well. Now, can everyone see this piece? It should be a piece that's located on the second bottom row of your side. It's the most basic piece in the game. It's called a pawn. So pawns on their first move can move two spaces forward, but the rest of the time they have to move only one space forward. So if you see in the picture on the left on my screen, this pawn can move two spaces forward because it has not moved yet and it's its first move. And from there, it can only move one spaces forward. Now, remember that I said that pawns attack differently than they move? So just remember that pawns can only attack diagonally, either to the right or to the left. So let's say your opponent piece is here, and then your piece is here. You can move your pawn to the diagonal to take that piece, and that piece is out of the game. So can everyone try to move a pawn two spaces forward? Just move any pawn two spaces forward. Yeah. And then same with the black pieces. Move any pawn two spaces forward. Yeah, just like that. Basically, you guys are alternating turns and taking piece, trying to build up the process by building a pawn moveset. So if you guys can see that after you move two spaces, the pawns can only move one space at a time forward. So from then, you can only move one space. No, that pawn can still move two spaces because it has not moved yet. So basically, all pawns can move two spaces, all of them, but only at the beginning. So before they move, they can all the pawns can move two spaces forward. So after then, you can only move one space at a time. So you can try to move another pawn two spaces forward as well. So Now, now talking about briefly about the promotion. So your pawn by any chance gets to the other opponent's side, then it can promote. What it means is that it can turn into other more valuable pieces that you want in the game. Since pawn is the weakest piece in the game, um, you, you wanted to promote and get it better to make it another piece. So pawns can, as I said before, only move forward. It cannot move backwards, it cannot move sideways. So it's pretty much the weakest piece in the game. But if you get the pawn to the other side, you can transform it even to the strongest piece in the game, which I'll show that later too. All right, that is it for the pawn. By the way, you guys should have 8 pawns in the front row, so it's good to know. And now talking about the rook, it should be shaped like this on the picture. So they should be located on the right and the leftmost bottom side of your side. So it should be shaped like this tower or a citadel. So can everyone find the rook? It should be located on the corners. There should be 2 rooks for both teams. So there are 2 rooks for the white side, the 2 rooks for the black side. So what the rook can do is that it can move anywhere on its column and it can move anywhere in its row. So obviously you guys can tell that rook is way stronger than a pawn. Rook is definitely one of the strongest pieces in the game, so you want to keep it alive. So let's say your opponent piece is all the way up there, all the way up in the rook's column. Then you can take that piece by moving the rook all the way there. So is it okay if, let's see, just remove the 2 pawns on the column of the rook, just to tell the children that you can take the rook, yeah, with the other pieces. So if that pawn was not blocking the way, the rook can go to all the way to the other side. So once I said before, pieces cannot move through another piece. When a piece is blocking it, that piece cannot move any further. So a rook, if it has an open space, if the pawn's not blocking the way, it can go all the way to the other side to take or kill the other opponent's pieces. So that's what a rook can do. It can move anywhere, back and forth, and left to right, anywhere on that row and column. So it's a really strong piece. Okay, now we're going to be covering the knight. So the knight should be shaped like a horse. And the knight should be located to right next to the rook. A knight should be right next to the rook, and you guys should have 2 knights on both sides. So a knight is a special piece. It can move 2 spaces forward and then left or to the right. It can move 2 spaces to the right and then from there to the left or the right. It can move 2 spaces backwards and then to the left to the right. And it can move 2 spaces left and then to the left to the right. So if you guys can spot the knight, which is next to the rook, can you move the knight in an L position? Can you move 1 knight? Okay, try to move a knight. Yeah, like that. Same with the black pieces. You guys can just try to move a knight. Yeah, just like that. The knight, as you guys just did, can jump over other pieces. The knight is the only piece that can jump over other pieces, but all the other pieces cannot jump over other pieces. Just remember that. A knight is a special piece that can move over other pieces if it's blocking it. So knight, just remember that it moves in an L position and then can move forward, left, right, and back as well. All right, now talking about the bishop. It should be shaped like a picture on the left here. So it should be next to the knights. You guys should have two bishops, and those are next to the knights. So those bishops can move diagonally, either diagonally right or diagonally left. So a bishop is also a pretty strong piece if you know how to use it right. So the bishop obviously can move to other spaces where the other pieces cannot reach it. So if you open a space for a bishop, for example, move a pawn up, that's blocking the path of a bishop. Can you guys do that right now? Can you move up a pawn that's blocking the path of a bishop? If the pawn is not blocking it by moving either one space or two spaces forward, you can move out the bishop. So can you guys try that? Yeah, the bishops can move diagonally like that, or if the open space is on the right of it, it can move diagonally right to any places. So it has a huge range where it can take the opponent's pieces. So even though the bishop is weaker than the rook, it can still take the rook by being in an advantageous space. So what that means is that bishops can move diagonally, but rooks can't. So there are advantages and disadvantages for each pieces. Just remember that. And that's the part of the strategy which comes into this game. Okay, now the queen. A queen should, each player should have one queen and it has a crown at the top. Can you guys see it? Yeah, that's the queen with the crown on the top. So the queen is the strongest piece in the game. You can think of it as a combination of a rook and a bishop. So queens can move on its column, on its rows, and also diagonally, and then left diagonally. So once you have your queen out into the board, when no piece is blocking it, you're in much of an advantage than your opponent because you already have your queen out, and then you can move to so many spaces with the queen that is threatening the other opponent. So can you guys try to move a queen by making a pathway for it? So move a pawn up so that the queen can move, either diagonally or on the column or the row. And then try to take the queen out into the board, into the middle. Open up a space for the queen to move, and then move the queen. Yeah, you can move the queen like that. Just okay, yeah. Try continuing on. Try to play an actual game right now. Try for the black pieces to move. Try to counter that. How would you try to do that? Yeah, I believe you moved a knight, which is a great choice because if you move the knight, it's attacking the queen. So the queen has to move away. So that's how the game basically works. So you try to take your opponent's piece and try to make the best out of it to take all the opponent's pieces, and the main objective is to take the opponent's king, which I'll explain right now. So the king should have a cross at the top. And although it's the most important part of the game, you lose the game without it because the main objective is to take or kill the other person's king. But the king is pretty weak. It can only move one spaces, either to the left, front, back, and right. It can also move diagonally. But remember that you can only move one space with the queen, with the king, sorry. So if you see on the picture on the right here, you guys should be able to tell that the king has a limited space where he can move. Because the opponent's bishop is guarding these two spots, the king cannot move into a check, which I'll cover that later. The king can never move into a check because the other bishop is just going to take my king. So the other available options are just the rest of the blue spaces here, which is pretty limited compared to where all the other places king can move. So try moving a king if you can, either to the left or to the right. But my strategy here is that you don't want to move the king unless you have to. Unless you are in check, don't move the king. So moving the king is always a bad idea. So I'm just showing you guys that you can move the king, but I don't suggest you do because you're going to get your king into more dangerous spots. So you just don't move the king and leave it where it is, and then try to move other pieces that trying to protect it so that you don't have to move the king into more dangerous spots. All right, now talking about the actual check. So a king is in check when an opponent's piece is in a position that can attack a king. A player must move their king out of the check, block the check, or capture the attacking piece. A player cannot move a king into a check. So can you guys set up to a position where the king is in check? For example, just any position where the king is in danger. Can you guys just place that? It doesn't have to be moved like directly. Just try to move a place where the opponent's king is attacked. So you don't have to like try to play it out. You can just try to move around the pieces freely to maybe like demonstrate it. Check. I'm not sure if I can see that right, but if, yeah, then the king is in check because you see that I believe that's a bishop. I'm not quite sure. I cannot see, but if that is a bishop, that means that it can still attack the king. So what that means is that the king has to either move out of the way, move out of the bishop's path, or try to block it by try to move a pawn up and block its path. If the path is blocked, then it cannot attack the king. Or if that doesn't work, you can either try to take the opponent's piece that is attacking to stop being in check. So you don't want to be in a check because a check just means that the king is in danger. The king is just about to be attacked. So the best situation is just to block it or to take the opponent's piece. If you have to, then you can just move the king out of the check. But you might be asking, what if there are no spaces for the king to move anywhere? What if there are no possible moves that can get me out of the check? Now that is a checkmate. So putting an opponent's king in a checkmate is the only way to win the game. So if you want to win, you need to have some sort of checkmate. So a king is in checkmate if it is in check. The opponent's piece that has the king in check cannot be captured, the check cannot be blocked, the king cannot move the square that is not under attack. So an example of a checkmate would be um, can you try to maybe attack with the queen and have an open space, other opponent's open space for the pawn? In that case, it would be a checkmate because you cannot block it. So I think it's better demonstrated in this picture. If you see on my slides right now, this, for example, is a checkmate. So you guys can see that the white is um, won the game because he put the other opponent's king into a checkmate. You guys can see that the king cannot move anywhere. If you see my screen, the king cannot move to the right. It cannot move diagonally to the right. It cannot move down. It'll all result in a check. You might be asking, what if I take the queen with my king? So what if the black king takes the white piece's queen? Then the knight's guarding it. Look at the knight in the below here. The knight can attack in an L, remember? So if the king takes the queen, then the knight takes the king, which leads to the loss of the black piece's side. So what if I don't move the king? What if I just move a bishop just to somewhere else? However, you cannot do that because the king is already in check. So we're assuming that this is the player with the black piece's turn. And they have to move somewhere, but they can't. And they're in a check. So that's a checkmate. The player with the white pieces put the player with the black pieces into a checkmate. That means that the player with the white pieces won the game. So that's basically how you win the game. And then if there is a win and a loss situation, which is a checkmate, there is also a tie situation. So a tie is called stalemate. Simply put, a stalemate is a tie. It is achieved when there is no legal moves for a player to make. So it'll be better to see my picture on my presentation. So right here, it's in a stalemate because the king cannot move anywhere. See, the king cannot move to the left diagonal, and then to the left diagonal down. It cannot move anywhere because it's going to be lead into a check. But the king is not in danger. The king is not in a check. So the king doesn't have to move. What if you might ask, I might just move the pawn that's behind the king. But the pawn cannot move because the king is blocking the way of the pawn. So there are no legal moves for a player to make in this situation. Let's assume that, of course, it's the white's turn and it has to move, but it doesn't have to. But there are no available moves for the white player. So it's called a stalemate or a tie. Okay, talking about one last thing before we begin the actual chess match is a special move called castling. So a castling is the only move that allows to move two pieces at a time. So if you guys can see on the picture on the right, you can see the king and the rooks on the other side. So can you guys try to show the children how to do castling? So there needs to be no pieces in between the king and the rook. So take it all out except for the king and the rook on the white side. So take the other pieces, just let's assume that they all moved out of the way. And then there is only the king and the rook and the space between. Then you can castle, which means is that the king can move right two spaces or to the left two spaces, and then the rook jumps to the other side. Let me see. So can you guys, for the black pieces side, can you just take out the knight and the bishop? Just take out the knight and the bishop. That one, yeah. And then no, on the same side. So on the right side. So take that bishop out as well. But for the black pieces side, just take the bishop out on the right side as well. There should be two bishops, so just take the other one out. I mean um the other bishop. So the black pieces bishop. So um there needs to be open space in between the king and the rook. Can you guys try to make a situation where there is an open space between the king and the rook? I can't clearly see, but okay. So I guess you don't have to worry about castling for now. Just it's a special move that you guys should just know of, and uh, just remember the basic move sets, and you guys should be fine. You guys should do fine in a chess match. So some basic tips. So this is basically how valuable each piece is. So obviously you want to protect your pieces from capture, but it helps to know which pieces are the strongest so you can decide who to save if you must choose between two. So the queen, as I said before, is the strongest and the most valuable piece in the game, besides the king. The rook is the next strongest, and then the bishop and the knight are in the next tier, and then the pawn is the weakest. It has the least value. So it's obvious like you want to keep the queen alive, and then it doesn't really matter that much if the pawn gets taken because it's the weakest piece in the game. And there are also 8 pawns. So you don't want to lose a queen just for a pawn. You don't want to do that because the queen is the strongest and has the most value. So it means that it's just the strongest, and it'll help in getting an opponent in a checkmate. So you want to keep those pieces alive. All right, now for the board control. This basically means that you have to build defense when you have to, and you have to strategize an attack. So think of a chess as a war. So if you want to attack, you don't want to go out attacking alone. You have to attack as a troop or as an army. So what you guys want to do is that try to attack, but have some backups behind it. So let's say you want to attack with the queen, but if the queen gets taken, what else would you do? So it's good to always have a backup ready. So for example, you can follow up the queen with a knight to have it cover its back basically. And you can try to pressure with both the rook and the bishop because a rook and a bishops are fantastic combos as one can move diagonally and one can move on the column and the row. Most importantly, just have fun while doing it. And I'm going to show you guys a video.
Chess.
Can you guys see this video?
How to play. The object of the game is to checkmate the other king. Checkmate happens when the king is in a position to be captured, it's in check, and cannot escape from the capture. At the beginning of the game, the chessboard is laid out so that each player is sitting across from the other and has the white or lighter colored square in the bottom right hand side. The chess pieces are then arranged the same way each time. The second row is filled with pawns. The first row should be set up as following, going from left to right: rook, knight, bishop, king, queen, bishop, knight, rook. You've set it up correctly if your queen is on the same colored square as the color of the piece. The player with the white pieces always moves first. A turn consists of moving one piece one time. Players alternate turns until the end of the game. Spaces may not be shared by pieces. Pieces cannot move through or over any other piece. Opponent's pieces can be captured by correctly moving your piece to the square of the opponent's piece. When a piece is captured, it is eliminated and removed from the board. Each of the 6 different kinds of pieces has a unique way of moving. Pawns move one square forward, towards your opponent's side of the board, at a time, unless it is the first time it is moved during the game, in which case it may be moved up to 2 squares forward. Pawns can only capture pieces 1 square diagonal in front of them and cannot capture pieces directly in front of them, but instead are unable to move forward. If a pawn reaches the other side of the board, it can be changed into any other type of piece. This is called a promotion. Rooks can move any number of squares side to side or back and forth. Rooks cannot move diagonally. Rooks cannot jump pieces, but instead capture the first enemy piece they move into. Knights move in the shape of an L, moving 2 squares in one direction, except diagonal, and then 1 more square at a 90-degree angle. The knight jumps over any piece in the way, capturing any opponent piece in its final move position. Bishops can move any number of squares diagonally. They capture the first enemy piece they move into. The queen can move any number of spaces in any direction. The queen captures the first enemy piece she moves into. The king can move 1 square at a time in any direction. The king can never move himself into check. Whenever a move directly results in the opponent's king being threatened, meaning if an action is not taken, the next turn the king would be captured, the attacking player must say check. The opponent must then use their turn to protect the king by either moving the king out of check, moving a different piece to block the path of the attacker, or by capturing the piece that threatens the king. If a move directly results in the opponent's king being threatened, and there is no move to protect the king, the attacking player then declares checkmate. The game is over and he wins. A draw, or stalemate, occurs when the king is not in check and the player cannot legally move any of his pieces, or if there is any other situation where there is an impossibility of checkmate. There are a couple other types of unique moves. The first is called castling. On a player's turn, he may move his king 2 squares over to one side, and then move the rook from that side's corner to right next to the king on the opposite side. However, in order to castle, the following conditions must be met. It must be the king's very first move. It must be that rook's very first move. There cannot be any pieces in between the king and the rook, and the king may not be in check nor pass through check. The second is called en passant. If a pawn moves out 2 squares on its first move, and by doing so lands on the side, it must do so by the very next to the square directly behind the other pawn. The first player to checkmate their opponent wins.
All right, so if you guys could hear him, so basically you just covered everything that I basically just said and covered all the moveset. So you're now ready to basically begin a chess match. So For example, this is an example of a chess match, and I'm currently playing right now. So this, if you guys can see my screen, is an online chessboard. So you don't really have to set it up because it is an online chessboard, but it's gonna give you an idea of how to play. So if you guys can watch my screen, so my opponent moved here. That means I can just follow up here. I'm just showing you guys an example of how to play, just to give you an idea of some strategies and some patterns that you notice. So I'm trying to attack the pawn right here. But he's protecting it with the queen, so I'm probably not going to do that. However, what I can do is try to bring a knight up. Remember that it can move in an L position and can jump. So right now he called a check. If you guys can see my screen here, my opponent's queen is attacking my king. So either I have to move the king out of the way or block the way of the check. So what I can do is block the way right here. Block the way of a check. I can try to attack the queen by, let's see. He's trying to take my pawn here. So what I can do is protect my pawn with the bishop. Now he moved a knight up, a rook up, which means that he wants to attack. Then what I can do is try to maybe force the queen back by moving my knight here. If I move my knight here, this means that I'm currently attacking the queen. So the queen had to move here. All right, so what I can do is I can just leave this be because if he takes my knight with their queen, then I can take their queen with my pawn. So I can just leave that there. And what I can actually do is trying to maybe move the pawn up to create a pathway for my bishop to attack. So maybe I move this one up. Here, I'm currently attacking the queen. So he had to retreat. He had to fall back. Now what I can do is maybe I'm trying to get my opponent into a check. So what I can do is maybe try to get my bishop up here. I'm trying to attack. So if I get my pawn up, I can try to maybe take the pawn. If he does that, then I can take the rook with my knight. Remember that the rook is way more important than the knight. So this is a really good deal. And if he does that, then I take his queen. Like that. Just like that, I'm winning the game right now. Because I just took my opponent's queen and their rook. So they're lacking one of the most strongest pieces in the game. So this would be a great opportunity for me to attack. So what I can do here is that maybe try to bring a queen up from here. Now he's trying to protect the pawn, which obviously I'm not gonna eat. What I can do now is bring the rook up. I can try to bring another knight up. Because I'm winning right now, it's okay to risk it all because I'm going out in an all-out attack basically. Now I'll maybe try to attack. Okay, I'll move my pawn to spaces to open up for my rook so that my rook can move freely. Maybe try to attack the opponent's pawn. Now he's trying to force my queen back, which I guess just simply go back here. Well, that would not do anything, so I'm just trying to force it back again. Just an interesting move, but what I can do here is just take the pawn here. Pawn here. I might call here, try to maybe like threaten the other priest's king. Let's see, try to move my knight away. I'll try to maybe take this pawn because my bishop is already guarding it, so the worst it can be is just trade it. So which I can just trade that. Going to move my queen back. Try to take the ponder. He called me into a check, which I have to move my king now. So which I can just simply move like this. Maybe try to force the bishop back. Now I can probably call a check by my pawn here. He moved the king, so maybe move my rook here to call a check again. He takes, which I can just take. Here and maybe try to take the bishop. She takes. So with only a few pieces left, what I suggest doing is that maybe try to move the pawn up, maybe to promote. Maybe I can do my other mistakes by just moving my pawn up, but I'm in check, so I have to move my king away. So I can maybe try to promote right now. But the bishop is guarding it, so there are pretty limited options for me. Maybe I'll try to move my pawn up because the only thing I have right now is a pawn, so I have to play it smart. Maybe move one up. This would most likely be a stalemate because there are not a lot of movements sets that I can make here. So The best I can do is probably try to take their bishop. Right now, what I'm trying to do is trying to maybe promote, possibly. Now I can promote and do call a check here. Now, this, for example, would go on for a long time, so I'm not going to continue on because I only have my queen and my king alive, and my other player has only a king alive. So this will basically go on until there is a win or loss, or unless you guys decide on some sort of agreement of who wins or a tie. So that is it for me playing. So maybe you guys can actually start. So if you have two players that are ready, maybe two contestants, they can maybe step up and try to play a match.